Okay, so I'm going to go through paper 1, starting off with restless Earth. First question really, what is one difference between oceanic and continental crust? This really, and it's really important to see, says here, study figure, make it zoom in, study figure 1. You need to get the answer from here. So a lot of people put that as different densities, that's great, but to develop the point you need some specific detail. So unless you know the densities of the two types of crust, use the information here, and you can see that we've got crust thickness. So do thickness and get your detail from that, really important. First question, study figure 1, get your answer from there. Second question asked about destructive plate boundaries, and people had a fairly good shot at this, but what they didn't really do was say how it caused earthquakes. So you've got to say about the two plates moving under, one moving under the other, the denser oceanic moving underneath the thicker, less dense continental. You might want to talk about the subduction zone and how it's as the two plates move past each other that we get the earthquakes, and that really they lock in place, the pressure builds up, and we eventually get a jolt, and that is what causes the earthquake. Moving over to this one here, having a look at a volcanic eruption. Now, really, people didn't. A lot of people talked about Iceland here, and this caused them quite a lot of problems. We need to talk about primary and secondary impacts. Primary are direct things. So if you want to talk about Iceland, then you need to talk about the ash cloud. But if you're going to talk about Iceland, you need to know about it. And a lot of people are talking about lava and volcanic bombs, not really applicable. So you've got to be specific. Secondary effect of this would be everything to do with the air traffic and the associated problems, but really you need to be able to have a range of different primary and secondary. So I'd say that something like Mount Nyiragongo is a much better example, or best example of all, Mount Pinatubo, and I'll tell you more about that in lesson time. So that's how you do the first one. You do need to have, for these 6-mark questions, you need to really be thinking about 3 different points which you put in with detail, and you need some specific examples. Moving out here, climate and change. First question here, one economic impact. So you need to take something from here and develop it. So streams flood, therefore people have money to rebuild. So it's really important to develop it. Again, study the figure, get your answer from the figure. If we turn over to here, we've done really well actually. This one, explain how human activity is leading to climate change. So people talked about pollution, which really means carbon dioxide, and global warming. So that was really good. People also talked about deforestation. You needed 2 distinct points, and you needed to make sure you explained to say how they actually did it. This one here caused a little bit of trickiness for people. Part C, explain how the future climate, and that's the key, if the UK is likely to be affected by global climate change. I must admit I did have to read this carefully myself, and I gave a few marks here which I had to take away because they talked about the economic impacts. You've got to focus on the climate, so talk about temperature, precipitation, maybe extreme weather as well, air masses, those sort of thing. So it's really important. Nice bit of specific detail in here as well, but no points given when you said that it may cause older people to die and this may have some economic effects. It was a brilliant answer, and a lot of people fell for this. Really detailed, develop it. You've got to develop it in line with the question, which in this case was climate. Moving over to here, admittedly it's not the best map in the whole wide world, but again, study figure 3. So get your information from figure 3. Describe the distribution of the tropical rainforest. So really, along the equator, between the tropics. That's what you need to say for rainforest. Along the equator, in between the tropics. So please do that. I did give a point here for being close to the sea. Over here, explain how the climate controls the distribution of biomes such as the tropical rainforest. It's a such as question, so you don't have to use a tropical rainforest, but I suggest that you do. So really, this is all about temperature and precipitation. So you can say how it's warmer at the equator, but you then got to say why it's warmer actually makes a difference in terms of the rainforest. So more warmth means that we've got potentially more photosynthesis and we've got more growth. More growth means etc. Rainfall, again, talking about how it's wetter, there's more moisture and things will grow. Really good answers would relate the fact that because it's warmer, we get more convectional rainfall. So you've got to talk about that. You could have used other ecosystems, but essentially you want to be talking about temperature and precipitation. You want to develop those with some examples. Really good here in the Amazon. You mustn't forget your examples in these. If you've only got 3 marks, it might be because you've not put in examples. Here, explain how the role of human activity in the destruction of tropical rainforests. Key thing here, and it's coming up in the mark scheme, is you have to have 2 distinct points if you're going to get into level 2, 3 or 4 marks. So some people wrote very detailed answers, really developed, but they didn't have 2 distinct points, 2 distinct case studies, and that lost them some marks. You've got to have 2 things here. So we've got deforestation, we've got logging here, then we've got a bit about goods and services and soil. So you've got to have your distinct points. But again, limited only to 3 here, needs more detail. So also in these, you must have case studies, really important, specific named places. Coming on to Waterworld, everyone did a fairly good job of this, really. I think almost everyone got it right. Stores, so you just need to talk about stores, no problems. Using examples, describe how human activity can withdraw water supplies. So mainly people talked about over abstraction, then you need to say what it is. So we take too much water out and therefore there is less. And you might want to give an example, e.g. in Australia, so people not getting the marks for not having examples. Then you might want to talk about dams. Really good example is the Nile. They've dammed it. It goes to about 7 countries. In 1 country, there's less water available. You may also have talked about water quality, but if you're talking about water quality, you've got to be careful when it says about supply, because they want to talk to you about quantity, really. So if you're talking about quality, you've got to say how that might reduce supply. Eutrophication came up with a lot of people, and generally that's a quality issue rather than a quantity. You can get away with it though if you say reduce quality means reduce quantity, so you've got to be specific. Here, intermediate technology, how can it contribute? So you've got to talk about the advantages of intermediate technology, and again the mark scheme was very strict, so people that didn't get as many marks here, it's because you only talked about one type of technology. For 3 marks you have to say 2 different types of technology. So pumpkin pots, an example. Tube wells, another example. People also talked about the little fish sort of tanks that they grow, that they develop that store water. You've got to have 2 or 3 examples. They need named locations of countries. You've really got to do this in terms of these exams. So that's a key thing people need to do. Finally, coming over to the coastal question. Looking at the graph, how are the changes? Again, I say this again and again with these sort of questions. What's the general trend? It's a decrease. Then talk about it fluctuating, then give figures. There's your 2 marks. Coming over here, explain how some waves erode more than others. Point and development for your 2 points. So destructive waves have a stronger backwash. All true. Develop it. This means that more material is removed. Could have talked about fetch as well. Then this last one down here, this was a tricky question in terms of the mark scheme, and I do feel a little bit bad for you, especially as it's 8 marks. What they really wanted you to do here was to talk about specific management, e.g. seawalls, and how that may cause some people to like it and some people not to like it. And you really needed 3 examples to get them full marks here. Again, the mark scheme was quite strict that you needed to have multiple examples. So you want to talk about some soft engineering, beach replenishment, and maybe vegetation planting, talk about strengths and weaknesses, and how it might cause conflict. Talk about something like a seawall, and if you really want the full marks, you need to talk about groins and say how it's good because it produces a beach and prevents erosion, but then it causes the problems of longshore drift being stopped, sand starving other places. So really, on an 8-mark question, you need 3 good examples, and you've got to choose your location well. West Bay is a good location. Studland isn't, because it's not got that contrast between hard and soft engineering, and it was important to talk about hard and soft engineering in this. It's also really important to see on these big questions, so in part B, the 2 big questions, you have got 3 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So you need to get it right. You need to go through, you make sure you've got your capital letters, your full stops, your commas in there. You need to use your geographical terminology and you need to spell things correctly. It's really good this person has gone through and they have corrected where they have made mistakes in terms of spelling and grammar. And you need to do that because that's 3 marks out of 63. We're talking 4%. Really important to pick up those marks. So have a little look at the mark scheme. What you need to do now is make sure that you know for every question what you needed to do in order to improve.